I'm Jonathan Lehman.
And I'm Mark Dever.
And welcome to this episode of 9Marks Pastors Talk. 9Marks exists to equip church leaders with a biblical vision and practical resources for building healthy churches. Learn more at
9marks.org. Did you make that slogan up, that little phrase that he just used? Or was that like...
This is like your introduction.
Oh, I'm being introduced right now?
The voice that you hear, Matt Schmucker.
Hello, Matt.
Hello.
Thank you for joining me. Can I say what your job is? What's your job, Matt?
Is it a secret job? We're in D.C. A lot of guys have secret jobs.
Who do you work for? Oh, I can't say.
CIA. I quietly support various ministries.
Oh, it sounds like the old International Foundation. Is this like tied into Rockefeller money somehow?
Oh yeah, we're loaded.
Well, look, we can publicly say that once upon a time, Matt was instrumental in founding what was then called Center for Church Reform.
Correct.
And is now called 9Marks. Whose idea was Center for Church Reform?
It's such a long time ago, people forget. You got to tell them the funny story. Don't mention the speaker's name, but a very well-known speaker who does well on YouTube was calling Matt up recently about exhibiting at a particular conference and wanted to know how specifically they thought ecclesiologically and was trying to make sure Matt understood. Can you just recount that without using the speaker's name?
Well, he wanted to be sure that I understood through this invitation to speak that I understood where he was. And I said, well, I think I understand. He said, well, now I'm a big supporter of 9Marks and I've got this kind of ecclesiology and this kind of theology.
And he's saying that like it might put you off.
9Marks, we support a lot of those guys and we pass out all their books. And I said, well, I know a bit about 9Marks. He said, how's that? I said, I helped Mark start it back in 1998. And there was this kind of silence on the other side.
But then it wasn't called 9Marks.
It was called Center for Church Reform.
It got called 9Marks pretty quickly.
For a little while.
Why did you lose Center for Church Reform?
It was clumsy.
Matt never could decide when he was writing out, spell it C-E-N-T-R-E or C-E-N-T-E-R.
And was this your first publication? 9Marks. 9Marks of a Healthy Church.
That was our only publication.
Booklet, which is, I'm looking at it now. It's like 27 pages.
But we didn't publish it initially. You'll note that's Founders Press on the back.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So that wasn't Center.
We couldn't afford to.
Exactly. But Tom could afford to do it for us.
Mm-hmm. And so you started with that booklet. And where did those 9Marks come from, Mark?
A series of articles I had written in our church newsletter.
Okay. And the purpose of this conversation, brothers, is that was 98. That's 20 years ago, right? This January, in fact. And that's why I thought it would be worthwhile for us just to do a little retrospective here. And since you were instrumental in starting it, I thought a good conversation would be reviewing the past, maybe looking forward.
Yeah, when you review 20 years, it's always amazing how much has changed and how much has remained the same.
Yeah, that's right.
So our total weight together is still the same. We just redistributed it slightly. Yeah.
Matt's gone down.
Well, I didn't want to say, but
I think you have gone down. What were you guys seeing out there that made you think, hey, we need a parachurch organization? Or did it not go down like that? How did this thing get started, I guess I'm asking.
I think that one's over to you.
It was actually a neighbor of ours who, here at Capitol Hill Baptist, who noticed something different about Capitol Hill Baptist. And what he meant was the people, not so much the building, though we had done some repairs on the building. He had watched this church for years and had known of its witness, and it was a reverse witness, you could say, in the neighborhood. And he wanted to know what was different. This man had some appreciation for early American Christianity because he had done a PhD up at Yale. And he wanted to see this kind of church, he would say, multiplied. Make a long story short, he said, why don't you start something that does that? And he offered to give us $100,000 a year for 3 years in a row to see if we could get off the ground. To this day, I'm not sure he's a believer.
I think he certainly means to be.
I hope he is. But that was
your income.
Humble beginnings. Yeah. Well, not all
part,
of it.
Part of it. That helped get you going for the first 3 years.
Yeah, and I worked out of the bedroom in the house next door.
Now, Mark, did you ever plan on being at the helm of a parachurch organization?
I don't know if I'd call my perch a helm.
What would you call it?
Think about that. Well, I'm not sure.
Tower.
No.
Throne.
No. Like a
behind the cannon.
A nexus point. a curtain from which I occasionally do this and whisper. I mean, just, it's,
Okay.
yeah. So, no, I had no aspirations in coming here to start any kind of organization. I had just come and am still here to pastor the Capitol Hill Baptist Church.
But if I remember correctly, coming to D.C., you saw it as a good crossroads.
Very much so, yeah. People come in, people come out, they go all over the place. You have people here from all over the world. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you decided, I wanted to talk about the 9Marks.
Right. You're reprising the incident at Gospel Coalition a number of years ago when Tim Keller has me and I think Crawford Lewitt's up on the stage, and we're talking, and he, after he talks to Crawford a little bit, he turns to me and he says, "Now, Mark, you wrote this book, The 9 Marks of a Healthy Church. Why only 9 or something like that?" And I said, "Well, actually, Tim, I'm very careful to not call them the 9 Marks. I mean, it's true there are 9 that I refer to in the book, but I call the book 9 Marks of a Healthy Church because there are so many marks of a healthy church."
Other things we could talk about.
Oh, many, all good stuff. I said, unlike, say, for example, and I pointed up to the Gospel Coalition, the T in TGC, So I think there are lots of good things we can talk about. These are 9 that, to me, when I first wrote this, earliest edition of this sort of in the early 90s, I thought were things that were too often missing in evangelical churches.
But you didn't say 9 things that are broken about the church.
Well, that's my tendency. I mean, as you would know well, Matt, I would tend to be sort of direct and critical, and I realized that that's not the best way to influence people. So don't change anything, don't lie, just try to think positively. What would you like to see in each of these things, and turn the list into that.
And so first there was the booklet. It went through how many editions, Matt? Several, right? 4 or 5?
At least, yeah.
And then when did Crossway step in and say, "Hey, how about how did it work?" I'm not sure.
Crossway talked to me about the sermons.
Yeah, right. Had you done the whole sermons before Crossway talked to you, or did that?
No, we sat with Marvin Paget in Union Station, and he said, "We keep running into this booklet. We want you to blow it up into a bigger book." And Mark, and you said, "I don't write books."
I was not interested in writing a book.
And you said, "Well, I could write 9 sermons."
I could happily preach a sermon series, though.
A topical sermon series, with the first sermon being on expositional preaching.
Very appropriate. My first topical sermon at CHBC is on expositional preaching.
So they did that, and we did some editing, and they named it the same title, 9 Marks of a Healthy Church, which was really helpful, but there you have it.
Did they put "the" on the first one?
No.
I don't think so.
Okay. So it started as a Crossway book, and I want to say it was 2001, 2002.
Oh, I think it's like 2000.
2000, and it's been through several editions since.
Been through 3. It's in a 3rd edition right now. I think we're ready for a 4th if Crossway ever says
Yeah,
they
no,
want a
no,
4th.
they do. I think they do.
They haven't told me that.
They told me, and I told you.
Oh, when did you tell me that?
I'll tell you later. Mark? Tell us again. What was it you were looking out there and seeing that you felt the burden to be like, we got to talk about this stuff? These 9 things. What were you seeing in evangelicalism that caused concern and you wanted to address?
A lot of effort, poorly directed. So well-intended effort, often put in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm. And what hole has it been filling? Why have guys responded well, pastors responded well to it? To the extent they have.
Yeah, there are a lot of haters out there.
Sure.
I get sent emails with links to withering critiques, of various aspects of 9Marks. In my mind, it's just all simple, transparently faithful repetition of what's in the New Testament about what a church is. And it's just stuff that's so plain, in fact. It's so non-innovative, it's so plain that it's very often just kind of overlooked. There's not a great financial interest. There's not a new thing that order all this and, you keep going, and we can make lots of money through this long series of, there's just some simple ideas that are biblical, and I'm just trying to help people realize that. And I'm as happy for people to realize these ideas through other people's books as through our stuff,
Surely there was other stuff out there at the time saying this, or no?
MacArthur would have master plan for the church, which would certainly have had some overlap. Proclamation Trust was having workshops, similar now to Simeon Trust in the U.S., about expositional preaching. So there are parts of it laying around, but particularly putting it together with plural eldership and careful church membership and the practice of church discipline Well, I could just walk through them all. Concerns were how evangelism was being done, therefore how they understood the conversion, therefore the gospel. But no, it's just this exact trail was not being followed by any other recent book. Though, if somebody were reading this and they were more familiar with 19th century ecclesiology, either from a Presbyterian side or a committed congregational side or a Baptist side, much of it would seem familiar.
Well, I like the way you often would show up and say, I'm here on behalf of your great-grandparents.
Yeah. Well, an example I always give of that is when I suggested using our church covenant before
Right.
the Lord's Supper.
Right.
And Jessie Trainham puts up her hand, a sister in our church in her 80s at the time, says, Pastor, I can remember doing that at my church in Mississippi when I was a little girl. And as I often say, I have no new ideas. I'm simply bringing back things that used to be very common that have been forgotten.
My impression, and tell me if you would agree with this narrative, is that kind of a revivalistic mentality predominated among many American evangelicals
In the 20th century.
in the 20th century, and that evolved into attractionalism
Yeah.
and sort of the 1980s seeker sensitivity.
And I think the 21st century is becoming too hostile for that to survive well,
Well,
without seriously lightening the doctrinal load even more.
before we get there, though, that kind of evolved into early, when the 9Marks started, sort of an emerging thing, which was in some ways a repackaging of a revivalism, repackaging of seeker sensitivity. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, over here, you kind of say, hey, as you just said, here's another idea. Let's look to the Bible rather than the latest, greatest business marketing methods. And a lot of pastors were like, oh, finally, somebody's, not everybody.
It's not all Ted Peters and Jim Collins.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, why did you get involved in it, Matt? Were you experiencing things at church that made you think, I want to get behind this? I mean, you were kind of a business guy.
I was saved during my college years and was saved into a pretty good church. And looking back on it, before 9Marks were ever written, it had many of them. They had elders, they had church discipline, they had membership. And then in the late 80s, they ran into the whole seeker-sensitive movement and the pragmatism that dominated in those years. And in my estimation, that particular group of churches compromised the gospel. And I was very discouraged, and I made my way back out of the Southwest and back up here to the D.C. area and went to visit my wife's grandmother's church, which was Capitol Hill Baptist Church. And I ran the pastor who had preceded Mark was actually teaching theology. He was not theological, but I didn't see the other Marks. And then that pastor left, and then I met Mark. And Mark gave a historical and biblical view to all my previous church experience. And I was like, that smells right to me. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I want to repeat that. I want to see if I can help grow that.
So in that sense, 9Marks really started more from Matt than from me. Because what I was doing was pastoring this church. Matt's really the one with the idea mm-hmm. of trying to somehow like package it and export it. Is that mm-hmm. fair?
Yeah. Though it was a brother who was down at Southern Seminary who called up one day and said, you guys are like Jurassic Park, dinosaurs really live, and I want to do a weekender. I want to bring 10 guys up and just hang out with you, and we'll call it a weekender. Well, how many years later now, we've had thousands of guys through that weekender program. So it's a lot of people contributing a lot of ideas.
Well, if I were to sum up the way Mark's relationship to 9Marks is, kind of springboarding off of what you said in my own experience as well, is you're an avid, you can disagree with me and say, no, actually, that's not how I see it, an avid advocate of these ideas and getting these ideas out there.
Yes.
You're a strangely passive participant in the growing of the organization. You generously give time on a semi-regular basis to me and Matt and now Ryan, like, okay, let's think through these things. Let's brainstorm on the journal some. Oh, what about this book? Or I'll read that book for you, Jonathan. Sure. But on the whole, you are, dogged on pastoring this church.
Yeah.
And passive is too strong, but something between.
Yeah, no, I think that's accurate.
Did you guys from the beginning have a goal like we're going to retake, evangelicalism? We're going to change the way churches go. I mean, what's been your goal?
The line we used was just try to inject again into the DNA of the life of the church these ideas. And I would even argue that there may not be a time when 9Marks is needed. If we've actually been successful at our work, that these things are just part of life in the church. I don't think we're there yet. I think every generation seems to be beating away something that's taking down these ideas. But that was our hope.
Yeah, and as would be no surprise to anyone listening to this, we don't have any kind of metrics where we're trying to view success as reaching X percentage of evangelical churches. It's just the Lord will do what He will do. We will be faithful in our day, Lord willing, and it's really up to Him and what He does.
So first it was just you and Mark, and he was the only author, but at some point you made the decision to bring in other authors. Talk about that for a second, Matt, and how that's just transpired. Give us a quick summary of the last 20 years.
I remember sitting in the Bull Moose, and a bunch of us were just thinking through who could help us write on these issues.
Yeah.
So we looked at pastors, really primarily, and then kind of think, okay, he would be good on this topic, he would be good on that topic, and that's how it kind of began. And really, it was the hiring of you, brother, that we started looking at if we could build a bookshelf, a low bookshelf, a mid bookshelf, a high bookshelf, meaning kind of heavy theological. What books would we want on that bookshelf? And now that I've been out of it since 2011 as the director, I'm delighted to see a big bookshelf, a growing bookshelf of books. That's just a fulfillment of a dream.
Amen. And one of the fun aspects of that, just for both of your encouragement, and also, Ryan Townsend, who's sitting here, is just as I travel around the world in various pastors' conferences, I've been in France and Spain recently as of this recording, just seeing the translations of 9Marks books. I handed out the one on discipling in Korean today to a Korean brother. I mean, these books are just, it feels like they're all over the place around the world. And praise God for the books having a continuing ministry.
Well, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I'm grateful, Mark, for the way you've tried to raise up other voices, authors along the way, because it's the ideas you're about, not so much this or that man's particular ministry as such.
Right.
So I think that's been a huge part of it.
I just talked to a man who was born and raised in India who is now in America, and he was telling me today about how he was thought he was a Christian, enjoyed the fellowship of the Indian church, but did not feel like he was growing in holiness toward God. And then he found this book, 9Marks of a Healthy Church. And started listening to some of the speakers. And he said, I went and found a like-minded church that we actually helped plant. And he said, that's when my life really began to change.
Praise God.
I was like, wow.
Praise God.
Any missteps you guys have made or you've seen made over the last 20 years that the organization or we've taken, or things you've learned from our critics?
Well, I mean, you and I, last year before last did that Don't Be a 9Marxist article. You can find that on the website. There are certainly ways that people can take various ones of the ideas, the corporate nature, the authority of the elders, the authority of the congregation, biblical theology. I mean, there's so many of these. Any of them you can probably take and run in the wrong direction and do it sincerely in the name of what we're advocating, when actually if you sit down and talk to us about it, like, we don't do that and we wouldn't encourage you to do that. So I don't know that I've seen one predominate, but I'm accustomed to that category of people who do things, I trust sincerely, thinking they're representing what we think the Bible teaches, when I'm going, I don't think the Bible teaches that.
Students often go too far or further than the teacher goes. Have you seen those kind of errors in the students?
You're talking about your congregationalism? I don't know. I mean, all the keys stuff, I wouldn't say too far. No. What are you talking about?
I'm talking about people who read the books, love it, go out, implement it wrongly.
Well, as I just referenced, I mean, I know that happens. I don't have any outstanding disaster examples in mind, but I'm used to very commonly having conversations with people who I think are like, oh, well, I understand how you started walking in that direction. I kind of wouldn't have done that. But,
But in the same way that we do at Capitol Hill Baptist Church, we do church discipline better than we did when we first practiced church discipline.
No
so that was the mistake of young men, or less experienced men, perhaps. So.
Yeah. Well, it's often to be zealous at first and then grow in wisdom as you're
caring for the sheep,
practicing something.
I would say that if you have any ambition, well, whether it's growing a church or something like 9Marks, don't despise the day of small beginnings. We had a lot of them, And
we still do compared to
well,
other ministries we could name.
We're poor. We were, but I think the other thing would be, and this I've learned from you, and it's more naturally your DNA than mine, is just be charitable to others who don't own all your ideas. I remember you saying, I said, well, if that guy doesn't own all the 9 Marks. He said, well, gosh, man, if he gets 2 or 3, that's a win.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, good stuff. Life's short.
You've been out of it for 6 years.
And I mean out of it. Really? What are you talking about? I wouldn't say that to him.
You
Matt,
stepped
you
away.
look fine. Your color's good.
Thank you.
You stepped away.
Means a lot coming from you.
It's watching.
I stepped away from the leadership of 9 Marks.
I love watching 2 old men fight.
We still do the Weekender together. It's like the two old,
that's right.
the 2 old men Muppets together.
Yeah, it's totally what it is.
Yeah.
What do you see?
Laurel and Hardy, which was the skinny one.
Yeah, I can't remember.
What do you see now? You've been out of it for 6 years. That maybe you couldn't see before. Anything?
Yeah, do you have a bit of distance on it that makes you be able to see things?
Boy, I love that you guys just keep going and you persevere in telling the same stories and the same lessons, and because you seem to get the same questions, except that they're
We're like one-hit wonders. Showing up at the concert, playing that one song
And once
again.
they're no longer wondering, we're still doing the one hit.
Yeah, that's
We're
right.
just doing
Well, I mean, it's in part why, because you've got a new batch of seminarians coming out who are just testing, learning how to do the training wheel. You're talking to 25-year-olds, but you're 25 years old, older now. So you just keep saying the same thing. It's like parenting, and the fruit that comes. You can't measure it, but you see it.
Now, why did you guys decide on Ryan Townsend to replace you? How did that transition work? Why'd you grab him?
Idea. Is that right? I'm pretty sure.
Well, I always give you the credit for my ideas.
I'm pretty sure it was your idea.
Inception.
But I thought it was a
Mark,
brilliant
don't
idea.
you think that Ryan Townsend would be a good
Ryan had
idea?
come to Christ here, very bright, from Georgetown, cheerful as could be, articulate.
That would be new.
Well, that would be a change in direction for the organization, but not all bad.
Positive.
That's true. He had different attributes, but
and handsome.
Can I make fun of you for just a second?
the best judge of that.
Why not? Why not?
Why not? My job changed slightly when I went
Oh,
from,
you already worked for him. How long have you been here?
I got here in 06.
So you were hired by him. You worked for him for what, 5 years?
Yep.
And now you've had 5-6 years working for Ryan.
Yeah, that's right.
A new Pharaoh. You could compare the Pharaohs.
What was fun was with you, we go into like
I can't believe you're going to tell him this.
we talked to a publisher. I think I may have told you this before.
Uh-oh.
We go
Doing
talk
it
to
first time on video?
we
Seriously?
talked to a publisher, or we talked to somebody, and I got to play good cop.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And then Ryan came on. I'm like, ooh, I better play bad cop in this conversation.
Well, I'm always the bad cop to his good cop.
We perceived that Ryan would have a great set of gifts about being able to manage a growing organization. Mm-hmm. He would have all the right DNA theologically. Mm-hmm. He had been on staff at a good church in Louisville and a leader there. And we knew he agreed theologically. He had worked here at our church before he went to seminary, after he was converted. He had actually trained and worked professionally as a management consultant for 5 years. Even that set of gifts kind of nicely led into nurturing a young and growing organization.
Yeah.
None of it matters if he doesn't have a pastor's heart.
Yeah.
And that he doesn't love pastors.
Yeah.
And
Which
he doesn't
does in spades.
and if he doesn't want to love the thing that needs to be reformed, and Ryan had all
The
that.
church. That's right.
Well, I think
So, and in fact, when he first brought him up, I think I was a little like, I think he's going to be a pastor. So I kind of had to get my mind around it.
Yeah.
I didn't doubt his ability in that, particularly with his business background, but I just thought, really? Okay.
Well, I think something that characterizes both Ryan and myself is there's this impulse in us that would rather be pastors.
Yeah.
And we both feel kind of constrained to keep doing this for the host of reasons that we could list. So I think that very much characterizes Ryan and myself. And what's been happening in the last 6 years? I mean, Ryan's been pushing an international direction. Other things differently you see? We're pretty much...
Well, the bookshelf is
continues to
fuller.
fold,
It's remarkable.
Yeah, that's right.
The weekenders are full.
Mm-hmm.
Lord willing, even it seems so far they've been, perhaps will in the future, years ahead of time.
Just in the last couple of minutes we have left, Mark, looking forward, what do we do next? What do we do better? What do you
Hopefully we
see?
greet the Lord at His return,
Amen.
and hopefully that's soon.
Yes and yes.
Do you mean in case that doesn't happen?
If that doesn't happen, however,
just keep doing what we're doing.
plodding along.
Yeah. But just being surprised at what all the Lord does with what initiatives he gives us and connections he brings us and opportunities. And
Amen.
yeah.
And yet 20 years have passed, and you realize time is limited. And there's just one thing about being our age now is you realize there's not an infinite number of books, an infinite number of conferences, an infinite number of conversations you're going to have. It's going to come to an end. So use your strength while you have
That's
it.
right. Yeah, I was in a meeting the other day, or earlier this week, with a well-known Christian preacher and author, and his guys had actually sat down with him and said, okay, for the next 10 years, we think we've got you to preach and speak. But then by that point, you may have reached your dotage, so those are your years to write. But right now, while you have the energy, we need to get you to this kind of audience to speak and blah, blah, blah. I thought it was some pretty good thinking, So, yeah.
Last question. If you want listeners, viewers, in this special edition,
why would you videotape this when then you're just going to go back to spoken word again?
That's a good question.
Okay.
Not one I'm prepared to answer because
All right.
I'm not sure.
All right.
What 2 or 3 things would you ask listeners, viewers to pray for the organization and its ministry?
Faithfulness and prosperity.
By prosperity, you mean?
That we help pastors, that churches prosper, that we're able to supply them with resources that help them understand the word well and put it into good, kind, loving, God-honoring practice.
Our faithfulness and the prosperity of the work.
Churches.
The church is good. Matt, would you add anything?
That an organization like 9Marks becomes unnecessary.
Amen.
Yeah.
Because we get this in our churches when we grow up as little boys, and we get this in our seminaries as we go off to study, and we get mentored by pastors who understand this, and we see it in our fathers and our mothers in our homes, the centrality of the church in the disciples' life. Make it unnecessary.
Amen. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Pleasure.